Donating money to charities is typically perceived as something noble. Improving someone's life by giving away one's own income isn't something people expect us to do. We are praised for doing so. At the same time, many charities emphasize that you should donate money to their causes. They run marketing campaigns and send people off to the streets for direct engagement with potential benefactors. And they are communicating the urgency of their endeavors and that it is very important that you donate to them. Today there's a growing and increasingly diverse number of charities that you could support. The causes include fighting world hunger, medical support in development countries, battling climate change, reducing pollution, supporting victims of crime and catastrophes, supporting mental health treatments, improving working conditions, repairing some dumb old church, and many more. Interestingly, it has become commonplace on YouTube that content creators give to charity in various forms. Mr. Beast partly built his whole YouTube career by donating money to people and charities, and many other content creators followed suit. Statistically speaking, however, most people do not regularly donate to charity. Although the next Starbucks coffee someone is going to buy could have improved a life significantly, we rarely do without our favorite coffee in favor of donating. Right at this moment, people are suffering from hunger, dying from preventable diseases and working under inhumane conditions, all while we spend a few bucks on Amazon without thinking twice. Is that a moral problem? Should all people who can donate do so? And if yes, how much should they donate? Well, that's a philosophical question. Picture this. Mark is on his way to work in the morning. He's wearing an expensive brand new suit and has a very important business meeting. He is walking through a deserted local park, and from somewhere near him he is hearing cries and splashing. The cause of it is quickly spotted. A child is struggling in a shallow pond nearby. It obviously cannot swim and is in mortal peril. Now, Mark could easily jump in and lift it out of the pond, but by doing so he would ruin his suit and would not make it to his meeting, which would have financial consequences. Are these good reasons to let the child drown? Is it okay for Mark to just head on without helping? This seems to be a rhetorical question. Of course not. Of course he needs to save the child. To just not bother in this case seems horrendous and despicable to all of us. Mark's suit and his meeting surely are nowhere near as important as this child's life. Now imagine a case where Mark would not be on his way to work but sitting at home in his living room, and the child was not in his vicinity in a pond, but in Ethiopia, dying of starvation. Can he save the child? Yes, not by jumping into a pond and ruining his suit, but by making some mouse clicks and donating something that is equal to his coffee budget for the week to a charity. Is it okay for Mark to not do these mouse clicks, keep the money and just carry on? Can he just let that child die? You probably thought that Mark obviously has to save the child in the first example. Considering that relatively few people donate to charity, there is a good chance, however, that you might think otherwise in the second case. To many people, it does not seem to be an obligation to make an effort and improve the lives of people in distant regions. But is there any relevant difference between those two cases? The child in the pond example is a well-known thought experiment by the Australian philosopher Peter Singer. In 1972, he presented an argument for the obligation to donate in his hallmark paper Famine, Affluence and Morality. The thought experiment is supposed to justify the following principle. We have an obligation to help others in need if we don't have to sacrifice anything of equal moral value. This principle plays a crucial role in Singer's argument for why we should donate to charities. Let's take a closer look at his full argument. The first premise of his argument will strike you as quite obvious. Suffering and death from lack of food, shelter and medical care are morally bad. This assumption should be uncontroversial. Of course it's morally bad if people die from lack of food and preventable diseases. The second premise contains Singer's famous principle we just talked about. We have an obligation to help others in need if we don't have to sacrifice anything of equal moral value. This principle will also seem intuitive to many people, as the child in the pond example has shown. The third and last premise is just a simple observation. Many people in the world can prevent something bad from happening without thereby sacrificing anything of equal moral value. This premise also seems to be plainly true. From these premises, Singer draws the conclusion that we have to prevent suffering and death from lack of food, shelter and medical care. At this stage, the argument is not designed for charities in particular, but we can get there easily. Let's take a look at premise 4. Giving to charities is a reliable and cost-effective way to prevent suffering and death from lack of food, shelter and medical care. Now, to show whether this is true in general would need some evidence-based demonstration. There are of course some corrupt charities and some charities that don't work well. But we can safely assume that at least a few charities are cost-effective ways of helping others, and the argument applies at least to those. GiveWell.org is a good website to research these charities. If premise 4 is true, we can conclude that we should donate to charities. The conclusion offers an affirmative answer to our question. Yes, we should give to charity. How much? According to the second premise, we should donate all the money we have, as long as we don't sacrifice anything of equal moral value. But how much is that exactly? Saving someone from serious illness or even preventing starvation is morally extremely valuable. If that's true, we should do without a lot of things in our lives. Your favorite non-fat frappuccino with extra whipped cream belongs to that category, but also going to the movies or eating out, or maybe the smartphone you are watching this video on. The consequence of this argument is that we should do without a lot of luxury goods that we cherish dearly. And it's even worse. Don't you love the faces of your children when you bring home the Lego Star Wars Death Star as a present? Well, according to Singer's argument, you should rather donate the money for the sake of other children in dire need. Of course your children will be disappointed, but this is nowhere near as morally important as saving a life. At this point, you might frown and start to think that there's something wrong with the argument. You might say, I see that there's something to be done, but you cannot expect me to donate everything that I enjoy in life to charity. I cannot possibly live my life in sheer austerity for the sake of people on the other side of the world. And you are in good company in thinking that, because many philosophers joined in criticizing Singer's argument. One way to phrase an objection based on your frowning is to argue that Singer's conclusion is over-demanding. If that's true, it would violate a well-known principle in ethics. Ought implies can. No one can demand something of you that is impossible for you to do. Of course, it's not literally impossible for you to stop buying presents for your children and donate the money instead. In principle, you could start living off rice and beans, rent the cheapest apartment possible and stop buying material things you could somehow do without. But that is really, really hard. As such, it ignores a related and also familiar ethical principle, the principle of minimal psychological realism. This principle was stated by philosopher Owen Flanagan, who wrote, "Make sure when constructing a moral theory or projecting a moral ideal that the character, decision processing and behavior prescribed are possible or perceived to be possible for creatures like us." Singer's argument demands that we start to donate all the money we currently spend on luxury goods. Even the money we spend on presents for our loved ones, or on things that we perceive as necessary but really are dispensable, or put in our savings account. If we think that this is psychologically too demanding, we might reject the argument because of that. It simply violates standards for good ethical theories. Or does it? Even if we think that the argument Singer presents is too demanding, a weaker version of the argument might still convince. Remember the principle that we should help others as long as we don't sacrifice anything of equal moral worth? Let's change it to: we should help others as long as we only have to do without very costly luxury goods. Lego for your children would then be okay, but a second car or beach house without real need would be unjustified. Singer's answer still holds: we should donate to charity. By the way, Peter Singer himself suggested at one point that we should ideally donate 30% of our income to charities. But as a rule of thumb, we can assume for the sake of the argument that even 10% is a good start. Another counterpoint to Singer's argument that we want to consider here states that the argument addresses the wrong people. In its general form, it is applicable to all people who earn enough money to donate it without sacrificing anything of equal moral value. But there are some people, such as Jeff Bezos, Bill Gates, Mark Zuckerberg, Warren Buffett and many more, who could save thousands of lives without sacrificing anything close to equal value for themselves. Whereas most people who donate 10% of their income are significantly impacted by such decisions. It's true that those who have to make the smallest sacrifice while saving many have a primary obligation to do so, but it's hard to see why that would excuse others from their obligation, at least in general. Imagine again the child in the pond example. This time, there's another person next to you just hanging out, who could rescue the child without ruining a fancy suit and without missing an important business meeting. But if the other person fails to act immediately, the obligation for you still applies. Saying, well, he could have done it with less trouble than me, doesn't seem to be a convincing excuse. It's true that the richer have a more pressing reason to donate, but this doesn't excuse others who can help as well. A last argument against Singer's conclusions states that we should address first and foremost those who are responsible for the unjust situations. If you think that politicians or corporations are to blame for certain unjust situations, then they have the primary obligation to address these injustices. This response is sensible. It's true that wrongdoers should be the first who are addressed when we ask who should help others in need. If the person next to me pushed the child in the pond in the first place, it's reasonable that he should be the one who saves it from drowning when confronted with the wrongdoing. But again, this consideration doesn't seem to undermine Singer's argument. If the wrongdoers fail to address the wrongdoing, we might still be obligated to help if we are able to do so. Also, there are many people who are in need of help without anyone having done anything wrong. According to the argument, we should still help, for example in the case of environmental disasters. So, should you donate to charity? Singer's argument makes a convincing point for an affirmative answer. If you are able to donate without dispensing with anything but luxury goods, there seems to be an obligation for us all to donate. The specifics are more complicated, of course. Those responsible for unjust situations should be addressed first and foremost. Then, those who can donate without the slightest financial setback should be addressed second. But as we know that preventable suffering continues, there's no good excuse not to donate right now, especially in cases of dire need that are independent of wrongdoing. Thanks for watching the video. What's your answer to the question of the episode? What problems do you see with Singer's argument? Let us know in the comments below. If you like these kinds of videos, don't forget to like, subscribe and share. And let us know in the comments section what philosophical questions you would like to see discussed.